All right, let's get started. Welcome everybody, and thank you for attending today's webinar hosted by District 297. This organization aims to interact and collaborate with Aruban citizens around the globe with the ultimate goal of connecting them with professional opportunities in Aruba. Through our knowledge sharing events, we hope to spark thought-provoking conversation and keep the voices of Arubans central in local affairs.
Today, we will be discussing various topics pertaining to Aruba's role in the Dutch Kingdom, but also its role in the European Union. The implicit question that we want to answer today in this webinar is whether Aruba's current legal status is still optimal for solving the challenges that we face. So I will ask everyone to please take 30 seconds, maximum 1 minute, to answer the following poll. This is just to see, to gauge the audience and see where we are standing with your ideas. All right, I will ask to end the poll. So we see that 2 people voted for the first option, 41 voted to sticking to the status quo, and then 24 to become a special municipality. So this already shows that this is a very contentious topic. It is quite a difficult one and quite a dense one. And normally these topics, or the topic of Aruba's legal status, is of course invoked in heated political discussions. However, today's webinar will not focus on the political side of things, but rather we will focus on information sharing. So here I would like to point out that District 297 is a platform, and it is giving the space to today's speakers to present their knowledge on these various topics. So we ourselves, we are not a voice, nor are we taking any sides in this debate.
Having said that, we now turn to the outline of today's webinar. After this introduction, we will start with the first topic, Charter of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which will be presented by Mrs. Mildred Schwengel, who serves as a member of the Advisory Division of the Council of the State of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Our second topic today is the Municipality of the Netherlands, which will be presented by Dr. Glenn Taudet, who is the rector of the University of Aruba and a board member of the Financial Supervision College of the BES Islands. Then we will have a 10-minute moderated Q&A session with both the speakers and our moderator, Juan Pablo Aguirre Broca. So make sure to write your questions in the chat. And the District 297 team will compile them, and Juan Pablo will pose these questions to our speakers.
Thank you, Daniela. Following this, Mr. Eddie Paris, the president of the Executive Committee of OCTA, will be presenting the third topic, which is the relationship of Aruba with the European Union. Afterwards, Dr. Gohar Karapetian, an assistant professor at the Faculty of Law at the University of Groningen, will present the fourth and last topic. That will be Aruba and the EU becoming an outermost region. At the end of these 2 speakers, we will have another Q&A session, which will have the same format as the first one, but then with the last 2 topics and speakers. So without any further ado, I will invite Mrs. Mildred Schwengel to please to unmute her mic.
Thank you, Juan Pablo.
Thank you.
And thank you for your introduction, and thank you, District 297, for inviting me to be part of this webinar with a team of excellent and knowledgeable speakers. I was requested to elaborate on Aruba's position within the kingdom and it had to be briefly and concise to provide some insight into the constitutional structure of the kingdom and to encourage some reflection. And these are complicated and sensitive times. The world as we knew it is in shambles due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It reached as far as our living rooms, affected our health and our well-being and the very way we live. It has shaken the social, economic, and financial stability of our countries. The Yoruba economy is almost completely dependent on its tourism industry, and it was hit hard. The credit rating agencies expressed their concerns in their respective reports. Like many countries, Aruba closed its borders and restricted travel. It basically shut down our sole economic pillar. Early into the pandemic, the government of Aruba reached out to the government of the kingdom for aid based on Article 36 of the Charter of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. On the islands, talks were and are currently being held about this aid, the terms and the format. Talks are also being held about the relevance of the kingdom, while on another level, for instance, credit rating agencies reference the kingdom in their reports. So how is the kingdom structured? And what is Aruba's position in it? What is the kingdom's relevance? These are some questions that could be raised. To answer these questions and to entertain the process of thinking, we need to step back into our constitutional history. So here we are, after the Second World War. Back then, we were still Colonie Curaçao. The world had pledged and was seeking peace, freedom, and a new beginning. Decolonization was part of this process, and the Kingdom of the Netherlands was on board. A key element in the decolonization process for the Netherlands was the entry into force of the Charter of the Kingdom in 1954. This charter created a new legal order for the kingdom and provided basic regulations to govern the kingdom's constitutional structure. The composition of the kingdom, as you know, has varied over the course of history. Currently, politically speaking, the Kingdom of the Netherlands is composed of 4 countries of equal standing, being Aruba, Curaçao, and Sint Maarten, and the Netherlands. Aruba, Curaçao, and Sint Maarten are autonomous, which means that they independently manage their own affairs, and kingdom affairs are managed by these countries together with the Netherlands. And that is being discussed in the Council of Ministers of the Kingdom. So what are the basic principles of the kingdom's constitutional structure? To start, the autonomy of the countries, being the independent management of the country's own interests by its own organs. This makes up the core of the charter. Then there's the part that states that the countries have limited power over kingdom affairs, because there are certain areas over which the separate countries have no sole control. These are listed exhaustively in the charter. The democratic state governed by the rule of law, this is crucial. Both the kingdom and all the countries of the kingdom are required to have a form of government based on the principles of a democratic state governed by the rule of law. This refers to fundamental human rights and freedoms, legal certainty, and good governance. First and foremost, each of the countries have the obligation to guarantee this constitutional norm. Then there is the principle of the voluntary acceptance of the charter. That would also apply to any amendments. Equal standing of the countries and the mutual assistance and cooperation. That emphasizes that they're making up one kingdom should also be expressed in cooperation and mutual assistance in matters belonging to the broad field of their own affairs. So kingdom affairs, as mentioned, there are specific areas where Aruba, and the same goes for Curacao and St. Martin, has limited powers. These areas are the following: defending the kingdom and maintaining its independence. Foreign relations. Only the kingdom is a subject of law in the context of public international law. Dutch citizenship. The kingdom has one nationality. There is, for example, no such thing as an Aruban passport. The safeguarding of the principle of a democratic state governed by the rule of law, the so-called waarborgfunctie. This article identifies the safeguarding of fundamental human rights and freedoms, legal certainty, and good governance as kingdom affairs. As said, the principle of a democratic state governed by the rule of law are primarily the responsibility of the countries themselves. However, the proper fulfillment of this duty by the countries is in the interest of the kingdom, and the Charter orders the kingdom to act as a guarantor of these principles. Then we have the areas that have to do with knighthoods, flag, and coat of arms, nationality of vessels and requirements in terms of safety and navigation, monitoring the implementation of general rules on the admission and deportation of Dutch citizens, extradition, and then the contents of the charter itself. Let's say if any supervision is exercised under the charter, it is the kingdom governments that would do that and would step in. So the structure used entails two levels of legislation and governance within the kingdom. You could say two roads. There is one kingdom level road where all the four cars are driving on of each country. And then there is the part that is the level of the autonomy of the countries themselves, where there's only a Aruba car driving. And of course, sometimes it crosses and you can build bridges. But let's say that's straightforward the way that the kingdom is structured. So how about the bodies and regulations? The kingdom government is composed of the Dutch Council of Ministers and the Ministers Plenipotentiary of Aruba, Curacao, and St. Martin. The Ministers Plenipotentiary hold political office, furthering the interests as set out by their respective governments. And if we are talking about bodies of the kingdom, I need to mention the Council of State also has an advisory role. Kingdom acts, Rijkswetten, regarding kingdom affairs are prepared and discussed in the Council of Ministers of the Kingdom. The kingdom acts are passed by the kingdom government and the Dutch parliament together. The parliaments of the countries, Aruba, Curacao, and St. Martin, may issue a reaction and present their argument to the draft legislation. They can also send special delegates to attend and speak during the specific parliamentary sessions. There are also some procedures to enhance influence by the countries that can also be exercised by the minister plenipotentiary, but there is no possibility for the countries or the respective delegates to vote in the Dutch parliament. Apart from these regulations, the different governments may also agree on a voluntary basis on mutual arrangements concerning affairs that affect the countries themselves. So matters that are not listed as kingdom affairs. This can be done by means of so-called consensus kingdom acts. An example is the bill for the much discussed Consensus Kingdom Act on the Caribbean Reform Entity. A condition is that the participating countries have to endorse such legislation. Mutual arrangements can also be adopted without any formal requirements. An example is a mutual arrangement that was agreed upon between Curacao and the Netherlands. I think it was in July 2019, with a view to reinforcing Curaçao's financial and economic management. And there are, of course, general kingdom decrees as to regulations and also other minor decrees and ministerial decisions. General kingdom decrees are what we call algemene maatregel van bestuur. In these cases, a prominent role is also played by the minister plenipotentiary. So what does this mean? Aruba's position within the kingdom when dealing with kingdom affairs is not one of majority vote or veto. Aruba depends on consensus-oriented deliberation within the Council of Ministers of the Kingdom and also outside through their respective dialogue that is being conducted by the governments. Consensus and workable solutions for all parties involved, backed with well-reasoned arguments, is a must, and always taking each other's concerns and interests in consideration. I would say the same applies also to all matters that are being handled by the countries. So not only when we're dealing with a Kingdom Act. And this is not always an easy task. So you requested me to present the structure. It had to be concise and plain vanilla. You also requested me to bring some point forward for reflection. You could ask existential questions like, what has been the added value of Aruba's partnership within the kingdom? What has this venture created? What are the strategic dependencies of Aruba, and in what way are these dependencies being influenced by Aruba's position within the kingdom? In more financial terms, and I really mean this respectfully, it's my background, what would be the prospectus of this kingdom alliance? How can Aruba benefit more? And what do we need to get there? And how can this constitutional venture provide assistance and support for the vision and objectives in the interest of the well-being of the Aruban people? Aruba also needs to ensure a seat at the kingdom's debate table on a wide range of topics, because there is so much to discuss in an ever faster changing world. I would love to talk about that, but there is no time. Strategic positions must be adequately manned. I have already mentioned one, but there is yet another, very crucial, that of Aruba's representative in Brussels. This position maintains and develops the gateway to the European Union. Apart from the low-hanging fruit, the position held by Aruba via the kingdom can yield more within the European Union. But apart from providing and acting as a springboard, this constitutional venture and the constitutional legal order offers an extra layer and institutional protection, both internally and externally. And I am not just talking about the protection of our borders, security and defense in general. It's an extra blanket, sometimes invisible. The democratic state governed by the rule of law that has been introduced by the Charter and is being embraced by many in our countries is about a we in each of the countries. The implementation of the rule of law and good governance is about the core of our societal models, in which citizens confer power to the government in exchange for protection. And as to the credit rating agencies and maybe our investors, I invite you to reflect. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Schengel. Right now would be a moment of applause. Of course, we're in a weird situation right now that everything is online, but thank you so much for having such a concise presentation of how the kingdom is exactly, how it works. Of course, it is very difficult to talk about everything, the whole context of how it came to be, but you did an amazing job and we will have time for questions. But first, I would like to invite Mr. Glenn today for his presentation. Mr. Today?
Yes, I do hope that you can
Yes.
see and hear me now. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I've been asked to speak about the special municipalities of the Netherlands and also share some basic facts and experiences I have. I will do my best to keep it basic. First, I want to congratulate District 297 with this initiative. Thanks for having me in this panel of knowledgeable speakers. And well, I want to talk about in the specific sequence as it was also shown on the slide. First, the subject of what the special municipalities of the Netherlands are. When we speak about the special municipalities of the Netherlands, in the context of the kingdom within the Caribbean area, we are referring to the islands of Bonaire, Sint Eustatius, and Saba. But in essence, these islands are not special municipalities at all. They are public entities. As a law scholar, to me, it is important to clarify this. If these islands were special municipalities, their governance would be contained within the legal structures of municipalities and provinces. But they are not. Instead, they are regulated as something different, called public entities. To be incorrect about these legal details often leads to incorrect assumptions and conclusions when discussing this topic. A few months ago, I heard a long interview on the Aruban radio where two former ministers were explaining how bad the status of Bonaire would be for Aruba. To argue for their point, they were quoting from the municipalities law and not from the law regulating the Caribbean public entities. And they were quoting a rule not directly applicable for the Caribbean public entities. The former ministers were using that example to show the little autonomy these islands have when compared to Aruba. And this is just one example of many I wanted to mention. I have had many discussions, both in The Hague, here in the Netherlands, and on the Caribbean islands, Bonaire, Curacao, Aruba, but also the other islands, where those I was discussing with were calling these islands special municipalities, and while doing so, making claims and using arguments that have no basis on the laws specific for these entities. To me, then, such claims and arguments on wrong grounds are invalid. So if we want to debate the status of the islands Bonaire, Sint Eustatius, and Saba, and compare their status to that of Aruba correctly and precisely, we should use the correct legislation, concepts, and names. It is for this reason that I want to propose that we do not call these islands special municipalities, but instead consistently call them by their proper names. And that is a public entity, Bonaire, public entity, Sint Eustatius, or public entity, Saba. Next to this, I often encounter the term Caribbean Netherlands while referring to these islands. I find this an interesting one, because while the islands have become part of the Netherlands on 10-10-10, the 10th of October of 2010, the Netherlands has become partly a Caribbean country at the same time. This name, Caribbean Netherlands, identifies with that. But here, the same applies as for the term special municipalities. It is not correct nor accurate to officially refer to the three islands together as the Caribbean Netherlands. Such entity does not formally exist. Each island is an individual public entity, and this is reflected in the legal framework and how the relationships work in practice. There is some collaboration, but there's even more solo behavior for each of these islands, so for each public entity. If you want to check all of this out in more detail, you can go and visit the website wetten.nl and search, for instance, for WALBES, Wet Openbaar Lichamen BES. There you will find the legal framework, and I will touch base on some of that right now. So what is the underlying legal framework? I remember when I became Gezaghebber, island governor of Bonaire, in 2008, the island was part of the Netherlands Antilles. And I do hope most of you know or remember that up until the 10th of October of 2010, there was this country named the Netherlands Antilles, and Bonaire, Curaçao, Sint Maarten, Sint Eustatius, and Saba were entities within the Netherlands Antilles since 1954. These entities were called island territories, in Dutch, eilandgebieden. Each island had its own local government to govern the island territory. The Netherlands Antilles was governed by a national government based on collective elections on all the islands. There were two government layers. Aruba was part of this reality from 1954, but in time, Aruba experienced this as limiting and stepped out of the Netherlands Antilles in 1986 to become a more self-governing entity, a country within the Kingdom of the Netherlands. As mentioned before, on October 10, 2010, the date referred to as 10-10-10, the kingdom structure was changed, and the country called the Netherlands Antilles was abolished. The island territories Curaçao and Sint Maarten changed into countries, and the island territories Bonaire, Sint Eustatius, and Saba changed into public entities within the Netherlands. So what basically happened is that these three islands, Bonaire, Sint Eustatius, and Saba, kind of like sidestepped in their status from being part of one country, the Netherlands Antilles, to being part of another country, the Netherlands. And this graphic you can see here illustrate that in a graphical way. And how is this regulated? The Kingdom of the Netherlands is an international law entity, a state, and the basic structure of the kingdom is regulated in the statute for the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Ms. Schwengel just alluded to that. It is there that we can find in the first article a determination of the countries within the kingdom. Nowadays, just the 4 countries are mentioned there. But if you go back and look at the statute of the kingdom as it was valid on November 2010, you will find an article stipulating that Bonaire, Sint Eustatius, and Saba are part of the Netherlands just after the article instituting these 4 countries. At that time, it led many to believe that these public entities were then kingdom entities instead of national entities of the Netherlands. As the regulation stands now, there is no more mention of these islands within the statute of the kingdom. We will find, though, special provisions in Chapter 7 of the Constitution for the Netherlands. Here there is a special provision in Article 132a, stating that by law, entities not being provinces or municipalities, so also not special municipalities, you could say, they can be instituted and abolished. The 4th paragraph of this article is of particular interest. Here, we will find a provision recognizing that the conditions within the Caribbean public entities can be so different in nature from the European part of the Netherlands that this would merit special legislation and measures. This provision gives room to implement the principles of subsidiarity and solidarity in the relationship between the European part of the Netherlands and the public entities in the Caribbean. These principles mean that when a public entity is most affected by a law or measure, the community of the public entity is involved more and more. And if needed, they can have more autonomy in that field. A few examples of the effect of this rule is the public health and the public finance areas. where Bonaire has a very different relationship with the national government than the municipalities, but also than Ceiba and Sint Eustatius. Now I'll discuss some of these practical implications of being a public entity. One very interesting area I find is that of the currency. In Aruba, we believe that the Aruba florin, our own currency, is a symbol of our autonomy. The local governments of Bonaire, Sint Eustatius, and Ceiba discussed the issue of currency with the national Netherlands government in the time before 10-10-10 and convinced them that based on the principles of subsidiarity, these islands should not have the same currency as the provinces and municipalities in the European part of the Netherlands, which is the euro. Instead, based on their long-standing trade relationship with the United States, there should be a special legislation for these islands to have the United States dollar as their currency. Now, just imagine this. In the same country, you then have a different currency for another part of the country. You can almost, it's an exaggeration, but imagine a part of Aruba, let's say north, telling the government in Oranjestad that they want the US dollar instead of the Aruba florin to be the currency in north. Well, another example, in healthcare, the island of Bonaire negotiated that they would want to be responsible for all preventative healthcare, while they want the national government to be responsible for curative healthcare. This is the case now, and because of this, our Bonaire citizens can now have kidney dialysis. There is a modern center on Bonaire, while this was never possible within the Netherlands Antilles construct before. Education also was such a case and became the responsibility of the national government, and large investments were made to neutralize the vast backlog there was from the time that Bonaire was part of the Netherlands Antilles in the quality of the education of Bonaire. Now the schools have the best results within the Caribbean part of the kingdom. One other interesting particularity, the provinces and municipalities are within the European part of the Netherlands and are under full application of European law. The public entities are excluded of this and have an overseas countries and territories or OCT relationship to the European law. This illustrates that public entities can enter into specific agreements with the national government. These, as they are called bestuurlijke akkoorden or administrative agreements, can contain measures that are particular to each of the public entities. Ceiba has such an agreement on financial measures called the Ceiba Deal. With Bonaire, there is an agreement to professionalize the administrative organization of the island, the public entity, so the public the island administration, as soon as possible. With Sint Eustatius, there is a totally different temporary measure in place which deactivated local government for a specific time and for a specific goal. I wish to end by underlying the fact that being a public entity has advantages and it has disadvantages. The first one, you could say advantage and disadvantage is not being a municipality or a province. Because of this, all laws and regulations which are targeted to affect municipalities and provinces just do not directly apply. I said it can be an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage, I just mentioned a few, but if we flip the coin, this feature also forms the greatest disadvantage. Sometimes the communities within the public entities cannot call upon the same rules that apply to inhabitants of provinces or municipalities. These conditions many times give rise to feelings of being discriminated, while this is not necessarily the case. Well, I do hope that you gained a bit of insight into the range of possibilities the status of public entity presents and which limitations it also may have. And I wish to leave my introductory remarks here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Today. I'm very grateful to have you and Ms. Strengel. Thank you for explaining a little bit more indeed about how complicated perhaps it can be to have such a status within the Dutch kingdom. I would like to remind everyone right now that we are moving to the first Q&A session. How this will work is that you can write your questions through the question function here on Zoom, or you can send them through the chat. I noticed that there have been some participants raising their hands. However, in this webinar, we will only use the written question format. In order to give everyone a little bit of time to write down their questions and gather their thoughts, I would like to already ask a question to Mrs. Strengel. Can you perhaps elaborate on what could be a benefit for Aruba's finance of being part of the kingdom or having European genes? So what are the advantages that Aruba has being part of this broader kingdom?
Well, and I have to be concise, right? I believe let's say financially, to start, if we look at our economic history, we had a lago that vested itself at the beginning of last century in Aruba and brought a lot of prosperity. And that had to do with political stability of Aruba. And it had to do also with our trusted legal system that we have. As to financing, I would say that if you read the report of credit rating agencies, they look at how well Aruba performs, and Aruba has been a steady one on certain evaluations. But what comes back every time is also what I say, the institutional blanket of the kingdom. And then again, I would say that our legal system, our laws has European genes, and it has a certain it's sound, and that is one of the things that also as an attorney working in a sector of transactions, it does make a difference. And then there's another point that's very important, and that is the position of the Supreme Court of the Netherlands. I would say that's a state-of-the-art Supreme Court. And if you look also into the offering memorandums that Aruba issues when going on the international capital market to raise funds or to lend, Aruba itself positions itself as part of the kingdom, with also the protection of Supreme Court, like the Supreme Court of the Netherlands. And there's a lot to say about it, but I will leave it here. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much, Ms. Strengel. I will pose now a question for Mr. Today. Thank you for your clarification, the BES Island definition. I have a question to the panelists. What is the fundamental difference between public entities and status aparte?
Thanks also for that question. Well, the fundamental difference is having the status aparte means actually that you are a country within the kingdom, and therefore you have your own council of ministers and your own legislator called the parliament, and you make basically your own legislation for your territory. And you are basically the sole legislator at that moment, except the kingdom government, who can also make sometimes some of the legislations, Rijkswetten, which are may also be applicable within your territory. But basically, you are the top legislator, again, except the kingdom government. When you are a public entity, you are within another country. It was the case of Bonaire when Bonaire was part of the Netherlands Antilles. So you had the legislator, the Antillean government, and you had the legislator, the eilandgebied, the island territory. So that still is the case now for Bonaire, Seba, and Statia, meaning that for some legislation the Bonairean citizens will actually have to influence the Dutch parliament, which is the Tweede Kamer, and the Council of Ministers of the Netherlands, because they are the government of the Basque Islands also. And they also can legislate on certain specific subjects. The island government, that is the Island Council, and the Bestuurscollege, the Executive Council, they can legislate also some subjects for their own. I mentioned that these topics sometimes are based on agreements between the national government and the local government. For instance, Bonaire wants to have more control on preventative healthcare, so they need to make their own legislation for that. But the curative healthcare is a responsibility of the Dutch government, so they need to legislate this within the Dutch government. But the Dutch government can make legislation specific for the Basque Islands. So that's the fundamental difference. Is then again, as a country, the Netherlands is a larger country and the Basque Islands are within that country. And status aparte means that you as an island, you are your own country. I hope that clarified it a little bit.
Thank you so much. The next question will be for Ms. Strengel. And perhaps Mr. Today would like to join in. So how does the ongoing process of implementation of the Van Raak motion, Nieuw Invulling Statuut, inform the organ legislation process and vice versa? There's a secondary question. What kind of new paradigms and constitutional relations between the European and Caribbean countries in the kingdom are being explored, especially when acknowledging how neo-colonialism could play a role? So I guess Ms. Strengel could start, and then perhaps Mr. Today would like to say. You're muted.
Well, I apologize. Was it Van Laar or was it Van Raak? I didn't hear it well. And which motion? Because there are so many.
Nieuw Invulling Statuut.
Nieuw Invulling Statuut. Well, what I can say about that is that, as I explained, any change of the statute would need the consent of all the 4 countries. That is one of the basic principles of the charter. But within the framework of the charter, you can always explore possibilities to work together. So I think in a nutshell, if I understood the question well, that's what is being asked.
I believe so. It was anonymous, or the question here. They are asking if what avenues or how is the relation being developed, especially seeing or acknowledging the notion of neo-colonialism. So I'm guessing, how are the countries working together while being careful about how they relate to one another?
Well, I know that there is a, am I muted? No, I know that.
You're muted now.
No, I'm muted. I'm sorry. I apologize. That is something that must be discussed on government level, I would say. There is also a discussion about if the colonization has been finalized. And tomorrow there is a verdict of the court in Sint Maarten that is going to deal with that. That is a specific foundation has sued the government of the Netherlands, and tomorrow the ruling will be issued. It had to do with the handvest of the United Nations, and they are challenging, let's say, the current status of Sint Maarten before the courts. So tomorrow the ruling will be issued.
Thank you. Sorry, all these questions. I will pose one more question, seeing that the time is a bit short. But then in the next, we will have then afterwards another Q&A session with the last 2 speakers. And if we have time at the end, we can try to have another Q&A for all the speakers. So let me ask this question. I think it was posed by Adjan de Gruijl. BES citizens don't enjoy the same rights and duties as being part of the Netherlands. And the BES islands are also not part of the EU. So in reality, what is the difference?
Well, let me clarify this, because if I raise that idea, if I raise that idea that BES citizens do not have the same rights and obligations, then that was my mistake. But that is not the case. As I mentioned, the BES islands are regulated and are they are instituted based on the Grondwet, the Constitution of the Netherlands, Article 132A. Meaning that all the fundamental rights and so on that every citizen of the country, the Netherlands, has, is also in effect for the BES citizens. The only thing that there is a difference, though, that administratively and government-wise, you can make a distinction on how you regulate specific things. For instance, the height of the government support when you are workless. So when you come into unemployment, those type of conditions can be differently regulated within the BES islands, so on these public entities, and as compared to municipalities. So that is the difference, actually. And then, but the part of the OCT, yes, that is a larger difference. The being OCT territory and not being part of the European territory and having direct effect of the legislation. For instance, one difference I want to point out is that because of that, when the general data protection regulation from the EU came into effect, that is in effect on all European territories, so also for the Netherlands, the BES islands was excluded from having the direct effect and the protection of the GDPR for the citizens of these islands. That doesn't mean that they don't have protection for their data, personal data, but then it's regulated a bit differently. And at this moment, it's regulated just as it was in the Netherlands before the GDPR. So with that, I hope I clarified it a little bit.
Thank you so much. If there is any more need of clarification, I would like to inform everyone that at the end of this webinar, we will have the District 297 email where everybody can send in their questions that were not answered. And then we will connect you with the speakers, and we will aim to see if they can be so kind as to answering your questions. Sadly, due to time constraints, I would like to thank Mrs. Mildred Strengel and Mr. Glenn today for your participation and your knowledge sharing to today's topics. And well, now let me turn to our next speaker for the webinar, which is Mr. Eddie Paris. Mr. Eddie Paris will be invited to the stage shortly, and he will present his part. Yes.
Am I visible?
Yes, visible.
Okay.
And
Thank you, Juan Pablo. Thank you, Daniela, the District 297 team. This is indeed a very different stage than what I have participated with before, some time back, with the District 297. I think I was a speaker at 3 different events that was mostly geared for the students here in the Netherlands. I'm in The Hague, evidently. Let me hold on. There's a technical issue here. Okay. But nevertheless, it's part of the new normal that we are living in. And this is good because the reach, I think, is more global than only to the diaspora of students living in the Netherlands. I can't see myself, but I think it's okay. I think you can see me. So I'm just going to continue talking, assuming that you're seeing me.
You're all good.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. This is the first time I do a Zoom like this that I don't see the participants. That's why. So, okay. Thank you. I want to thank also Millie and Glenn for their very technical presentation. A lot came up. I took some notes. I didn't really set up a presentation myself of slides because there's so much I want to talk to you about this particular topic. I'll try to keep it short because we are already nearing the 1 hour limit, but I'm sure maybe I hope the participants are still interested in listening to our side of this public political partnership within the kingdom and the European Union. There are three, I think I had on the slide here, yes, three bullets. I kept it only to 3 bullets because I don't want to make it very technical. Because to me, myself, this was a no man's land up to 2.5 years ago. So I want to just make it very more of an introductory presentation because not only for me, but I'm sure for many of you out there, you must be asking, what is it that we are doing here in this position at the Aruba in Brussels for the past 35 years? I will say 35 years because I start counting from status apart going on, even though Aruba is enjoying the OCT status officially since 1964. So I'm just going to go touch the basis about the legal basis for Aruba as an OCT, overseas country and territory, associated with the European Union. I think this word answers also a question that was posted just now in the Q&A about the BES-eilanden. No, we are not a territory of the European Union. We have an associated status with the EU. And how did this come about? This came about it goes way back to 70 years ago, pretty much, when Robert Schuman, the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, to prevent wars, like Millie also mentioned the word war. I'm going to come back to that. He came up with a brilliant idea to set up a steel and economic partnership community for some member states. Today we call them member states, but back then mostly Germany and France. So based on that basis, this developed further into the European Economic Community and then it progressed in 1957 to the Treaty of Rome, and that's where the Overseas Country and Territory Association status came to life. That is thanks to the French, because the French, as you know, back then, as much as they wanted to be part of this European Economic Community, wanted to include also their former colonies, well, at the time, still some active colonies, especially in Africa. The French were really the geopolitical players of the world. And so it was a condition of the French to include this as one of the many options. There are many options, mind you. Later, after me, Dr. Karapetjan is going to speak about UPG, that is outermost regions. Aruba enjoys the status of OCT. But again, there are many options we have explored in the past. There were many back and forth political discussions about which option is the best. So I'm happy to see that at the beginning of this webinar, you posted the 3 questions, and I'm happy to see that the option that was chosen with 61% is the status aparte. And I don't say this for political reasons. I say this for practical reasons, because if you go back, if you look at the treaties, that's why I mentioned specifically 70 years ago, going way back to the Second World War and 1957, the treaty of the functioning of the European Union. It's also known as the Treaty of Rome. This has been quite a long time back. And basically, it was only since 1986, that 35 years ago, that we have been actively using this special associated status that we have within the EU. So I'm going to leave it to this. I'm not going to make this a lecture on history. I'm sure Glenn today would have enjoyed that. But that is our legal basis. It's a treaty basis, meaning it's, yes, I will keep it short. Like I said in the beginning, there's a lot. Juan Pablo sent me a message. There's a lot I want to speak to you about. So I'll try to keep it short. And we've come a long way. We've come a long way to make a change now to a special municipality or UPG. We are now in an exponential growth stage, I would say, and which I'll go right away down to the second point, the second bullet, which is the projects realized on Aruba since 1986. Two objectives here that I want to share with you. One is to show you in dollar or euro value what the relationship has meant since 1986, let's say to now, to this day, but also to show you that between 1986 and up to around 2003, the EU was practically a no man's land for us, even though we had a representative here in The Hague and Brussels all these years. And this is not to reproach any of my predecessors. We all put our bricks. Rome was not built in one day, but it is a ripple effect. It takes a long time. So now that we are in the, let's say, the spiral going up of this exponential growth chart, it's very important that we continue with this relationship. Changing now is not recommended. It's not prudent. So briefly, to give you some numbers about from 86 and on, basically what we enjoyed in that period was mostly the EDF, the European Development Funds, which is basically a provision parallel to the budget of the European Union that was set up by member states. It's voluntary contribution. It's non-budgetized. And we're very thankful for that. We, being the OCTs, the African and the Pacific, Caribbean and Pacific states, and the outermost regions, we all receive funds from this grant. To give you some idea quickly, the airport apron extension in 1986 was financed by the EDF6. And then in the EDF7, you had the Bloedbank building, including the fixtures, furnitures, and equipment. The EDF8 was the Arikok National Park. That was 7 million euros plus 4.4 million for the National Museum. The EDF9, unfortunately, a politician on Aruba made a statement here in The Hague around that time saying that Aruba was one of the richest countries in the world. And so the EU is listening, of course, and so we missed out on that EDF allocation. The EDF10 was 8.8 million that was allocated towards the National Educational Plan. And then finally, the EDF11, which spanned from the period of 2014 to 2020, which is the period in which we're in now. We signed this agreement last year in Tahiti for 13 million for a new faculty at the University of Aruba. I think all of you are pretty much aware of that. The EDF will stop to exist. This is one of the changes that are going on now. Perhaps you hear about this, about the new LGO-besluit. No reason to panic. This is just about budgetization, making it more simple, and including, especially in the Overseas Association decision / LGO-besluit, special provisions for one of our OCTA members, which is Greenland. Groenland is a very big player for us as partners because a large portion of the fish that Europeans eat come from Greenland. They have a very large economic exclusivity zone area. That by itself is a topic I can spend a long time about elaborating about the benefits of all the 22 members of OCTA, what we could mean for the European Union. So from 86 and on, as I mentioned, you can see we enjoyed the low-hanging fruits, which is the EDF. But moving forward, in 2003, pretty much, that's only 17 years ago of this relationship that goes way back to 1957. to give an idea, is when the Association of Overseas Countries and Territories was formed. It was established, 22 members all over the world. We encompass an area larger than Europe, but important point to mention here is awareness. Awareness is still very, very low. I'm going to try to wrap up. So let me just jump down to, I got some notifications here that where we're standing today. There's a lot that OCTA is doing. I'm just going to mention, okay, then I'll move a long list, but I'm just going to mention very important, the last two on Horizon 2020, which is the platform, a horizontal platform of EU. This is not European Development Fund with billions. We haven't enjoyed this at all. The OCTA is professionalizing. When I joined here, OCTA had one person, just the coordinator. We have now a coordinator. We have a staff of a finance manager, an energy officer, and a programs manager. So we are professionalizing OCTA. This is with 80% of EU funds. We are professionalizing. It's very important for us in order to be able to sell the OCTs to the EU, to show them what it is that the EU has meant for us over the past many years. The awareness level is very low. One way to build the awareness level is by professionalizing OCTA. Another is we are setting up Friends of OCT, Samira Rafaela, I think you heard of her, but also other MEPs, members, European Parliament members, who can speak on our behalf and present resolutions. So we have a more say within the EU. Like I mentioned, it is a no man's land. You have 27 members now without the British. It's a supranational organization, very big, very layered, very bureaucratic. So OCTA is a voice for the 22 members. After the Brexit, we will still be 13. We still have strength in numbers. The Horizon 2020 also is part of professionalizing OCTA. We will be hiring, well, not hiring, we will bring on board, because he or she will not be on our payroll, but a dedicated manager to look into Horizon 2020 projects. This is very important. This is going to ladder down for Aruba all the way to WEP Aruba NV and the algae farm that was started many years back with local capital, but it was not sustainable. And the last point I want to mention, again, I have a long list, but the time is very short, is the debt restructuring, which is on the agenda of OCTA. Meili mentioned war. I think with this COVID, we are in pretty much wartime conditions. Without the strategic partnership with the EU, I can tell you from experience, our member state, the Netherlands, is not going to plea for us within the EU. This we have to do ourselves. So if it was up to me, I would even want to have a staff here, because it's a very strategic position. And the debt restructuring, if you look at the different reports, the IMF debt burden reports, Aruba is way beyond, even before the COVID, the sustainability rates, the SDGs, poverty, etc., the von der Leyen agenda. It will be very difficult for us to meet these objectives without this strategic partnership. So to wrap it up, to start up a new structure for Aruba, it's not recommended, not at this time. We're now enjoying the benefits of what we have sown so many years back. I think we have to continue on this path. I think this partnership, and of course, it's because we are a former colony of the Netherlands that we have this associated status. So we are thankful for the Netherlands, and we're thankful for the EU. Like Meili mentioned, the EU gene laws is extremely important for Aruba to move forward, to be able to surpass all these challenges now, especially because of the COVID, which we're in. I did it very fast. I hope I'm get invited again to do maybe a webinar only based on OCTA, because there's so much to share. This position, the awareness is so low, and there are many opportunities up there. I'm just going to wrap it up since we're over time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Paris. Indeed, I know for a fact how much can be uncovered out of this topic. Sadly, we have to continue with the following speaker. However, as previously mentioned, we will have a Q&A session where we can uncover a little bit more of this huge black box sometimes that we might not understand how it functions. So without any further ado, I would like to thank Mr. Paris and welcome our next and final speaker for today, Mrs. or Dr. Gohar Karapetian.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation to talk on the legal position of Aruba in the European Union from the perspective of the so-called outermost region, the OR status. Today my talk is twofold. I will first focus on the French island of Mayotte that underwent a transformation from an OCT, overseas countries and territories, to an OR, outermost region, in 2014. Thereafter, I will concentrate on possible transformation for the island of Aruba in becoming an outermost region. But first, what does the status of outermost region actually mean? Well, as introduced by Mr. Paris, there are actually two main statuses for overseas territories within the European Union for the of the member states. The so-called OCT on the one hand and the OR, outermost regions, on the other hand. Currently, the European Union counts 9 outermost regions, which are geographically very distant from the European continent. France, Portugal, and Spain are the 3 member states that have outermost regions. French outermost regions are, for instance, Guadeloupe, Martinique, and the island of Mayotte. Portuguese ORs are Azores and Madeira, and the Canary Islands are the Spanish outermost region. Well, the main principle of application of European Union law in the outermost regions of European Union law in full in these territories. The Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union sets out the essential details on the region of the regime of ORs. In the treaty, there is a closed list of the territories which fall under the special regime of ORs. And yeah, the main rule governing the OR status in European Union law is actually the goal of full incorporation of these territories within the law of the European Union, while taking into account the natural characteristics and specificities of these islands, of these regions. The list of characteristics in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union is actually the key of understanding the OR status. Only, for instance, the peculiarities of OR's the small size, their difficult topography, climate, perhaps economic dependence on a few products permit the justification of possible deviations from European Union law. So the aim and scope of these derogations from European Union law is actually to meet the needs of these territories. Well, the outermost regions have a unique potential. They can benefit the European Union as a whole. They provide, of course, a European presence in strategic areas of the world and have pretty exceptional characteristics that make them excellent laboratories for research and innovation in biodiversity, renewable energy, etc., etc. So there are a lot of benefits linked to the status of OR. Such as the circumstance that ORs, outermost regions, are part of the European single market. So in sum, OR status means, as opposite to the OCT status, that all the European Union law in principle applies fully in these small, relatively small territories. Mayotte is a French island. It's also an outermost region. It is located in the Indian Ocean between Madagascar and the east coast of Africa. Mayotte's population is estimated approximately at 200,000. And it is important to know and to stress that Mayotte is an integral part of the French Republic, meaning that its inhabitants have the French nationality and the French citizenship, and thereby also enjoy all the rights and freedoms that French citizenship entails, under the same conditions as all other French nationals in the French mainland, meaning that they have the right to vote in presidential elections, the right to vote in national referendums and European Parliament elections. And of course, they are also represented in the French Parliament. Okay, Mayotte was an OCT, an overseas country and territory, until 2014. Aruba, the current status of Aruba is also an OCT. In 2011, a special procedure was started to give Mayotte an OR status. And the main reason behind that transformation of Mayotte's status is actually the transformation of Mayotte status according to national French law. French law has mainly two statuses for its overseas territories, the so-called overseas departments and regions, where all French law applies, and the overseas collectivities, where various deviations can be made with regard to the application of French law. Well, in 2011, Mayotte became an overseas department and region within the French Republic, meaning that in principle, all French law applies there. And according to the French, the outermost region status is then better suited to the institutional development of Mayotte within the French Republic. So the French logic is that if all French national law in principle applies in a specific overseas territory, then this territory should be an OR according to European Union law. So the status of the French overseas territory according to European Union law depends on the status of the specific territory according to national French law. Well, we have heard of the talks of Mrs. Schwengel and Mr. Taudet, that there are two statuses for overseas territories within the Kingdom of the Netherlands. You can be an autonomous country, or you can be an integral part of the country of the Netherlands as a public entity at the BES-eilands, Bonaire, Sint-Eustatius and Saba. Well, Aruba is an autonomous country within our kingdom, which entails that it manages its own laws fully, except of course of the topics that are mentioned in the statute, in the charter and statute as kingdom affairs. Becoming an OR means that Aruba should adjust the European Union law on various topics, such as, well, labor law, employment, the law on entry and stay of foreign nationals, the right to asylum, social security, environmental matters, agriculture, a lot to mention here. As a consequence, the laws in Aruba on the topics which fall under the competence of the European Union law will correspond to the laws in the Netherlands, since in a hypothetical case, in both territories, the same European Union law will apply. And that will entail a pretty peculiar situation where, according to European Union law, the same law applies in both Aruba and the Netherlands. However, according to National Kingdom law, Aruba and the Netherlands are both autonomous countries. And that entails a pretty strange situation, which we, by the way, are dealing now with within the kingdom. The BES-eilands are public entities of the Netherlands. They are integral part of the Netherlands. However, according to European Union law, the BES-eilands are OCTs. So before transforming its or possibly transforming its EU status, I think in the first place, there should be an agreement on the national status of Aruba within the kingdom. If Aruba aims to stay an autonomous country within the kingdom, then it's absolutely free to implement various aspects of European Union law and go further than the current OCT status. However, if it aims to become an integral part of the Netherlands, then it can be institutionally more correct if we follow the French logic to transform into an OR. And that brings me actually back to the question that you all had to answer at the beginning of the session with regard to the national status of Aruba. And I think that a thorough discussion on that topic is really necessary, since the outcome could possibly have crucial consequences for the EU status of Aruba. So in conclusion, there are many benefits of the OR status. I've mentioned a few, such as being part of the EU single market, more additional funding. However, the OR status and the OCT status cannot be separated from the national status of the island, of a specific island, in our case Aruba, according to a national constitutional law of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Well, thank you very much for listening. I'm very curious what kind of questions you have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Karapetian. Thank you so much for talking a little bit more about this really complex situation that Aruba finds itself in with its let's call it a weird citizenship with a lot of rights and obligations, but we can always discuss further. I would like to remind everyone that you can pose your questions. We already had two, so I will start with those two, but please continue messaging us through the Q&A function of this Zoom. The first question will be directed to Mr. Paris. It was posed by Mr. Andrew Dykhoff. He asks, what are the requirements for an OCT to ask for European development funds?
Yes, you can hear me? Yes,
Yes.
okay, good. No, the European Development Fund ended now in 2020. The EDF 11 was the last one. It's pretty much an allocation, meaning that basically you have to present a project plan for you as an OCT to receive that fund. The last one was the STEM faculty at the University of Aruba. For the next budget period, which will start next year for 7 years, 2027, the EDF, the European Development Fund, will cease to exist. It will have a new name, Neighborhood of the Worlds, something in that scope. And the reason for that is because it will be budgetized, meaning basically technically the same thing. Every country has to present a plan, which has an EU aspect to it. There's an eligibility criteria. It has to be justified. Those are pretty much the requirement. The EU wants to see an added value for the allocation, but basically you have to present a plan. But it is already an allocation. It's not, you can lose it if you do not present a plan. But it's pretty much pre-allocated for the next budget period. The French and the Dutch OCTs, because Greenland will have a separate budget, separate amount, it's pretty much around 155 million euros to be distributed amongst these 12 OCTs, 6 French, 6 Dutch. So basically it's up to Aruba, the government of Aruba, to present a plan. I think evidently sustainability is going to be the core added value here, which fits also the European Green Deal, and then it should be an easy allocation depending on the definition of the project.
Thank you so much. I will ask the following question to Ms. Karapetian. If you can answer this, and if not, perhaps Mr. Eddy Paris can add a little bit but we want to get as many questions as possible. Mrs. Melanie Kelly, I believe, she said, great job to the speakers. Can Holland one-sidedly decide for Aruba to become a UPG or a OR then?
Thank you very much for the question. Let's make clear that the Kingdom of the Netherlands is part of the Union. So the member state is the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So it is the kingdom as a whole that should ask for transformation from OCT to OR. So it is the whole kingdom, meaning that also Aruba has its own say in this transformation procedure and its transformation process. I have read a few documents from the transformation procedure of the French island of Mayotte. And from that document, you can also see, of course, that the, let's say, the local constitutional bodies of the island of Mayotte are also, in this procedure of becoming an outermost region. It's not only the French Republic, but also the island itself. So in our case, it will be the island of Aruba, Curacao, Sint Maarten, or the BES.
Thank you so much. The following question, posted anonymously, is what are the obligations for Aruba to be able to be part of OCTA? So I believe, what are the membership conditions? I would guess this would be for Mr. Paris.
The conditions to be part of OCTA, it's an automatic right since we are part of the Dutch member state, the Netherlands, for example. So based on that, we are a member of OCTA. All the 22 members are by extension previous colonies of 4 European Union member states, the Netherlands, France, Great Britain, and Denmark. So basically that is the main condition to be a member of OCTA, which the name says itself, overseas country and territories associated with the European Union.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Karapetian, another question for you. Would an OR status restrict Aruba's financial autonomy more than its current status? So more than its current status being status aparte? You're muted.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, apart from the special European Regional Development Fund allocations, outermost regions also benefit in, for instance, the area of agriculture from various programs funded from the European Agriculture Guarantee Fund, meaning that if you, let's say, make a distinction between, on the one hand, the European legal order and the Kingdom legal order, I don't know whether the question is for the consequences of the OR status within the European legal order. It means that there are more funding opportunities for Aruba when it becomes an outermost region. From the national perspective, it means that more, let's say, the laws on the financial autonomy should correspond more with the laws within the Netherlands than if Aruba stays an OCT, the current status of the island.
Thank you so much. I'm trying to see the questions that I'm getting in. Perhaps Mr. Paris would like to elaborate on one of these topics, because I know, for example, that when it comes to agriculture, Aruba not being so big on agriculture, that these funds would not directly apply. And that also some funds have to do, for example, with the regional funds, that has to do with a region's GDP, but having such a high GDP per capita on Aruba, this certainly has a role in what funds we could be eligible for, right?
No, that's not the case for Aruba. The eligibility criteria is not more than 75% of the EU standard. The EU standard GDP per capita is now over 35,000, between 35 and 38,000 euros. Aruba's is below that. Last I see in the statistics is around 25,000. And with the COVID, who knows what the next statistics will show. So the eligibility criteria is not an issue. The issue is the awareness. That's why the OCTA, amongst other things, has organized different platforms to build up awareness, different workshops for different horizontal programs. Erasmus Plus, for example, Aruba has been doing very well. But if you see the last 2 years, we have held in Brussels with Aruban stakeholders different workshops, and Erasmus has grown since then from 19 to 46 projects. That's a growth of 126%. So it has to do with awareness, not the eligibility criteria. I mean, if you want to buy or sell something, you need to know about it. And that is a key role of OCTA, to increase the visibility of us as OCTs within the EU. Believe it or not, the EU, even though they grant these platforms, the money is there, but they don't know about us, which is what I showed also, mentioning the low-hanging fruits. Again, not to reproach anybody. It's a matter of time. It's a matter of having resources. We didn't have internet at the time. We didn't have OCTA at the time. We are professionalizing now. We are now in the exponential growth cycle, and now is the time to continue and take advantage of all these platforms. So no, it's not the eligibility criteria.
Okay, and we received one more question that will be also directed to Mr. Paris. And sadly, we will have to start wrapping up after this question, but please do stay here. So the question is anonymous. How are you actively assisting the government of Aruba to present a plan for economic development? Have some plans been executed?
For the economic development of Aruba?
Yes.
Post-COVID? Well, yes. Parallel to this specific function, I personally was busy with trying to get local meaning Dutch investors, to help with the refinancing of our loan portfolio, but the COVID derailed all of that. But coming back to the more of this other function that I'm speaking out of today, EU, of course, like I mentioned in the beginning very briefly, OCTA, we are looking now for a dedicated officer who can identify and write up project proposals for us, for amongst other things, the algae project, which I saw in the Q&A, so I'll elaborate right away on that. The algae project was started with funds from the RDA, 5 million. But there was no plan, there was no follow-up plan as to what do we do with the algae. Yes, we know now we can grow algae, but what is the offset market? What are we going to do with it? Who are we going to sell it to? Horizon 2020 is an innovation platform with a lot of money in it, but Aruba has not enjoyed this platform at all, because you need, amongst others, partnerships in the EU. The qualification criteria, the write-up is not easy. So yeah, that and also with WEP Aruba NV, for example, we're using reverse osmosis, but there are plans being developed like the solinator, which makes more use of the sun. It's cleaner. Reverse osmosis is not the best friend for your environment. We have to look towards the Green Deal and find the opportunities in there. And Horizon 2020 is a great platform for that. And so, yes, we are working towards identifying these opportunities. The OCTA will bring out in January a blue economy study, which is also another area which we might be looking at towards diversifying our economy. We signed already the Oceans Declaration. We have to move on from declarations to being more binding agreements with the EU. But again, that's why the essence is time. That's why in the beginning I showed we're looking at 70 years of history here, and only the past many years from 2003 on, and the last 2 years that we are really professionalizing Okta so that we can get to these opportunities. It's been a long road. Everybody contributed with their brick. It's a ripple effect. The rings are getting bigger now. So now is the time to continue with the benefits.
Thank you. Indeed, I think, so I'm going to make a very executive decision here, but I will just stretch this out a little bit with one last question that I think ties in very well with this last point that you made, Mr. Paris. But then this question is for Ms. Karapetian. How has the OR status benefited the development of Mayotte? Has it been more positive or negative towards its development? Perhaps you might have a few pointers on this.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this question. Well, I mentioned that the main reason for this transformation for Mayotte was actually the transformation within the French national constitutional law. Mayotte wanted to incorporate and implement more the law of the French metropole, in this procedure, there were a few derogations made for the specific of Mayotte in order to ensure that the island was given some more time to implement various pretty technical laws within the European Union. As far as I know, the experience is up until now pretty positive because Mayotte is also, as an OR, part of the European single market that has stimulated their competition and trade. It has improved their, let's say, their efficiency and helps, it did help cut prices, etc., etc. So up until now, I think that the experience has been pretty positive. But I think it's important to mention again here that the constitutional position of Mayotte, according to French national law, is completely different from the constitutional position of Aruba within our kingdom as an autonomous country and as an overseas department and region when it comes to Mayotte.
Thank you so much, Ms. Karapetian. Well, with these notes, I would like to thank the last two speakers, and again, the first two for their participation. And I would like to ask everyone to give them a little round of applause in your own houses or offices. I don't know where you are. And before we continue to the last part, I would like to ask the team on Aruba if they can put up the poll again. So it is the same question that we asked you in the beginning of this webinar. However, we want to see if perhaps through this new information that you might have, we want to see what differences there might be. So again, we will take about 30 seconds or so until everybody has voted. All right, so we can see that the two votes that were there in the beginning, they have remained for independent. And then we can see that relatively we have remained at the same position. Perhaps the differences might come in that some participants had to leave. Of course, we're a little bit over time, but I think this still shows that there's a lot to talk about on our country of Aruba. If we want to bring about change or if we want to keep the status quo, we have to be mindful that there is a really larger context to all of these topics. And I really like the fact that you all joined us for this webinar, and perhaps you've learned a few things. I know I did. And who knows, perhaps in the future we can do a part 2 and continue the civil discussion. Daniela?
Yes, although we have to wrap up this session, if you have any additional questions, you can write your questions to us in the chat and leave your email address to connect you to the appropriate speaker. Or I also have added the District 297 email that you can email us directly, and we will get those questions to the speakers. And they have agreed to answer those questions. So for our future events, please stay tuned to our social media platforms to find out what's next. And thank you so much for coming. and being engaged in this conversation. See you next time.